Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to the Royal Botanic Garden in Sydney. My name is Peter Dorr and I coordinate the Youth Community Greening Program, which is an outreach program for the Botanic Gardens where I go and work with youth across the state basically. But today I'm in the beautiful Botanic Gardens and welcome along. A few housekeeping things. If you want to get accreditation through NESA and that, apparently you have to be involved in the chat and make sure that we have your NESA number so we can tick you off. So originally it was planned that we would be presenting to you live from Barradine Central School, which is about 7 hours northwest of here. It was planned that I would be up there for Science Week running some garden workshops throughout that region. Due to the current situation with COVID, they don't want us up there and it's completely understandable. So here we are in the Royal Botanic Gardens. Generally, when I do teacher professional learning days, they're usually full days and they're very hands-on and it's not in front of the screen. So this is quite unusual for me. I'm sitting down, I'm inside and I'm looking at a camera, but we'll get through and I'm going to try and squeeze through as much as what I would do in one of those days into the next hour. So I've got a bit of a slideshow. It's more to prompt me to stay on track than anything else. And hopefully you'll be able to see that as we go along, and I'll talk about some of the pictures and we'll go through some of the water saving ideas that we use in school gardens. So the actual workshop is called Learning Through Gardening, and we run quite a few of these throughout the year usually, but this year unfortunately they've had to be cancelled. So the first slide we have there basically is just to remind me to tell you about what we normally do in those days. For example, last year we had 3 teacher professional development days. One was at Macquarie Fields, half the day in primary school, half the day in the secondary school, and we went through workshops ranging from composting and worm farming to propagation, habitat gardens and Indigenous garden spaces, and basically it was very much hands-on and learning as we go. The second one we did was at Reby Juvenile Justice Centre, and the 2 smaller pictures there you may be able to see depending on when your little screen is. They're taken from inside the Reby Juvenile Justice Centre where we had the day. And it was more focused on student engagement, Aboriginal education, and the top little picture there, it's got Uncle Dean Kelly in the middle there, and that's to remind me today to slow down, because he often talks to us about being patient, just relaxing, slow down. I don't want to rush too much, but I want to get through as much as possible at the same time. When we did the day at Reby Juvenile Justice Centre, Uncle Dean came out and he spoke for the first hour. It felt like about 5 minutes, pretty much on that. Just take your time, take everything in. And I've known Uncle Dean for a long time, and he's often telling me to relax. I think I'm a pretty chill sort of a person, but he's often telling me, his sort of motto is if you can get one thing done in a day, well, then that's good. But sometimes we've got 50 things that we need to get done in the day. So it would be nice to live by that motto. The larger photo on the right is taken from Wambanglang Environmental Education Centre, about 20 minutes from Dubbo. And that's where we did the final workshop last year. And that was pretty much on what I'm going to talk about today, on water saving. Because out near Dubbo, they were going through a terrible drought at the time. That particular day, we had 40 teachers from all over the state, and it was over 40 degrees, but they were out all day working hard. So we went through things like we created a wicking garden, a no-dig garden, a herb spiral. We also created a bug hotel and a number of other things. And then they're hopefully able to go back to their schools and create those as well. And some of those schools then I can also go and assist them with. So what I'm going to try and do in this next hour is squeeze as much in as possible. We're not going to be creating the gardens, but I'll give you a bit of an idea on how to do that. Okay, that's not working. There we go. A little bit about the Youth Community Greening Program. So this program has been going about 12 years now. I've been coordinating it for the last 7 years. And basically it's to work with young people across the state. It's externally funded to work with disadvantaged youth, but I'd love to come up with a better term because a lot of these young people and myself don't feel like they are disadvantaged. But basically we work in low socioeconomic areas or remote communities, and any sort of garden program, any gardening program at all. So when I first started, it was probably 90% vegetable garden, produce garden. Now it's probably vegetable gardens are probably about 20%. We do a whole range of gardens, and I'll get to those shortly. Another reason why I'm not real thrilled with the term disadvantage, I can recall talking to a teacher from a selective high school recently, and he was asking me about some programs, and I was talking about this high school and how the students had laid the slab for the potting bench and put up the shed and put the electricals in and done all of those aspects. And he was telling me how he's not allowed to do that at his school. He has to bring contractors in to do that. I'm sort of thinking, who's disadvantaged really there? These kids are getting real life experiences, which is really worthwhile and great. So since started, we've worked with over 450 sites across the state, and about 350 of those have been schools. I think about 120 have been regional, and 230 thereabouts have been within the Sydney metro area. So pretty much if you work in a school and it's in a low socio-economic area, if the FOE, which is the Family Occupation Education Index, is above 120, 130, I used to say 130, but stretching a bit, then we can certainly come out and assist you with garden programs, no matter what they might be. There we go. Here's just a few pictures of a few garden programs. The top one in the middle actually is interesting. It was a little school at Liverpool, and it's something I'm going to talk more about in the presentation. They did what most schools did. They wanted to start a vegetable garden. So they bought some raised beds, and they bought the organic mix from the local produce store, and they filled the beds and they planted some vegetables. And I was actually there helping them plant on the day. And a couple of months later, they're ringing me saying, why aren't they growing? The vegetables aren't growing. They're going to seed, nothing's happening. And I pretty much knew it was the soil. I saw the soil at the time. So I went back out and we just dug some organic material through it, a bit of manure, a bit of sugarcane mulch, just mixed it all through, replanted, and then 2 months later they were harvesting produce like that. It's really important to get the soil right, but we'll be talking about that a little bit later. Some other sort of areas we work with, the picture on the right, just with students with special needs, SSPs. The one down the bottom, tree planting day and things like that. Habitat gardens is something that's become really popular, and of course bush tucker gardens or Indigenous gardens are very, very popular as well, which we get a lot of requests for. The one on the left, the two pictures are from the same space, a few years apart. These are taken from within Reby Juvenile Justice Centre. Initially, that garden was created for the boys within the centre. Then there was a change, and now it's predominantly girls within the centre, plus a few young male offenders. And it was felt that the space was a little bit too male orientated. So we planted some more flowering natives. We put in some grasses for weaving activities, and we also put in a water feature. And this is just putting in the water feature a couple of years back, and there was quite a bit of arguments between the boys and the girls about the way it should go, which was quite entertaining. But, and that's what it looks like now, the photo below. We can't even actually see the water feature because the grasses that have grown so well, but it's really nice to hear it in the background as we're working in the garden. But yeah, any sort of garden activity, we're up for it, we're keen to be involved. So now we'll get on to the more sciencey things, because it is Science Week, and that's why we're here. So when I go to schools, I ask students invariably what do plants need to survive, and they can always tell me that they need water, they need sunlight, and they need some sort of growing medium, soil. But do they really understand, I guess why water is so important and what plants need water for? And water has lots of different purposes within plants, and probably the three main ones are there. It's a solvent. It dissolves materials within it. So coming up through the roots, the water not only just takes water, it carries other minerals and salts and all sorts of nutrients with it, which is dissolved in that water and spreads it through the plant. It also assists in maintaining cell structure. So you've often seen a plant that might look a bit droopy and then you water it and it comes up again. That's the water going into the cell structure there. But probably most importantly is for the photosynthesis. So the water comes in, and some people struggle with the whole idea, but to simplify it, I guess as best I can, we have the water coming up through the roots, which is 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen, H2O. We have carbon dioxide coming in through the leaves. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but it comes in, and that's CO2, 2 parts oxygen, 1 part carbon. When they come in, the sunlight causes a chemical reaction there, and then we have a waste product, and that waste product is the oxygen for us to breathe and every other animal to breathe. If we didn't have the water as part of that process, then there would be no oxygen. So it's crucial in that regard. It's also critical in the fact that after that process, that reaction turns the carbon dioxide and the water into glucose, which is stored in the form of starches and carbohydrates and different things within the plant, in the roots and in the fruit. So the plant can survive through dry periods. It also gives the plant that energy to grow. But that energy is also transferred to us when we eat the plants. So the water is critical for the oxygen, but also to provide us energy. It's very important. Which leads me to the next point. We know it's important, but why do we waste so much of it? So I go to schools every day, and often I'll see sprinklers like these go watering away, wasting so much water. Conservatively, I would say 90% of that water is wasted, probably more. And it's going on the paths, on the side of the building, on the tops of the plants. Every kid in that school can tell me that the water needs to go down to the roots, but it's just waste and gets evaporated away. And it gets evaporated away for lots of reasons. Mainly, it doesn't reach the soil where it needs to be. But also, sometimes that soil is not of good quality. And we can see that other picture on the top right. That soil there is hydrophobic, and that is not uncommon. In fact, I see that regularly when I go into schools, and they're wondering why their vegetables aren't growing properly. We pour a bucket of water on that soil and not 1 milliliter will go and penetrate the surface. And that's because the soil is hydrophobic. Basically, when the organic matter leaches all the goodness out, it leaves a waxy residue, and then the water can't penetrate. And it's easily fixed. You just need to dig a bit of organic matter through there, and you can fix that straight away, and then the water will come back down again. So once you leave soils for too long, it ends up looking like that. And sometimes when you buy the organic mix, it's already like that when you put it in. So you've got to make sure you add extra things into the soil. School compost is an amazing way to start. And schools can create much, much better soil than what you can buy down at the local hardware store. So if I get a chance at the end, I might talk a little bit more about composting. The picture on the bottom left there was another teacher professional development day, and it was just interesting to show that, that hydrophobic soil. The garden, nothing much was growing. It was a really nice garden. I had to encage it because the possum was eating everything. But the soil was hydrophobic. Nothing was growing. We dug in there. There was no worms. There was nothing crawling around inside the soil. However, where we were standing, they continually mulched around the gardens. And if we pulled away a little bit of that wood chip, then underneath there were worms everywhere and all sorts of living organisms which needed to be in the garden. So we basically parted the top layer of wood chip, and then we started putting some of that in and digging it through. It's important not to put wood chip onto your veggie gardens. Basically, as a mulch, it's good with native gardens if you want things that are going to grow for a long time. But if you want things that are growing to provide fruit and vegetables over the next few months, then what it does, if you put the wood chip in veggie gardens, to help break down that wood chip, it absorbs a lot of the nitrogen and other goodness out of the soil to help break down the wood chip. And therefore, that soil becomes depleted of good materials or good nutrients, and so the plants won't grow properly. Often you'll see them, they'll go yellow. Now that nitrogen will stay in the soil once that wood chip breaks down again, but that's a long process, and you wanted to eat your vegetables prior to that. So put sugarcane mulch or straw or something like that as your mulch on top. So which leads me to the last picture there. The lettuce is going, I mean, still plenty of good lettuce there, but it should be mulched to retain a lot of that moisture. It's really important. Alrighty, let's see what else I've got. So just a few little ways to conserve water. One, harvest water. A lot of schools have got rainwater tanks now, which is really important to harvest a lot of the water from the roofs. Hand water is best with a hose or a watering can, though it is strange that all the students know that the water needs to go in the soil, but you'll still see them going around watering the plants for 2 seconds on the leaves. But yeah, it's good to get down into the roots, but hand watering with watering cans and a hose is much better. Using mulch to retain that moisture in the soil. and either watering early in the morning or later in the afternoon, which is sometimes difficult in school, I know, but it is better because in the heat of the day, you're going to lose a lot more water. Plant selection, if it's not a vegetable garden, then you should be planting local native endemic plants. They're used to, they grow in that climate, so they're perfect. And once they're established, you don't need to water them. Increase the organic matter within the soil because that holds a lot of the moisture. And the last point is similar to that, garden water storage. So if you have like a no-dig garden, for example, full of organic matter, it holds a lot of moisture. So you're holding water within the garden, or you can create a wicking garden, which I'm going to talk about shortly. And that actually holds a reservoir of water in it. Okay. So wicking gardens. Normally this is an engaging conversation here, you know, what is a wicking? Who knows about wicking gardens? But just going to get straight into it here. Sorry, talking to someone else. So if you have a look at that illustration there, it gives you a rough idea of what a wicking garden is. You have a reservoir underneath, you have a water inlet, and then you have an overflow as well. If you don't have the overflow, the water's going to rise up through the soil. It's going to become waterlogged, and plants don't like to be really saturated also. So basically you have some sort of liner at the bottom, if it's in a garden bed, so the water is contained. That only comes up to the point of the overflow. Then you have some sort of structure in place to hold the soil up so the soil just doesn't collapse down through your reservoir. Now, what I've done recently is sometimes I do something like this. If we have an old garden bed, for example, I'm making a real mess here on the table. We've got lots and lots of pots left over, so we might put this all over the base of the garden bed. So lots of trays, lots of pots you can use, old bread trays, milk crates, all these sorts of things. And then our fabric goes over the top of this, and then the soil on top of that. I'll show you that a little bit more detail. So what we might do, that wicking garden in the picture there, that's just a little herb garden I've got on my deck at home, because I've got a veggie garden. It's down the back around the corner, and I use herbs all the time. So I don't want to be traipsing down in the veggie garden, so I can just go out into my deck. It's an old bench seat that I just took the top off. So basically I lay down some pond liner underneath, and then I put pretty much this structure in, covered it with an enviro cloth, and then put the soil on top of that. And I've got my herbs in there just outside on the deck. But I think I've got video now. Let's just check out this little video. It shows you how to, basically shows you the general idea of a wicking garden in a mini form. Or does it? Maybe I should a little bit. Maybe I see it's lying around.
Oh, they can't hit video.
Okay, so apparently you can't hear the video, and technology is not my strength. I have Christian here, he's working away. Look, might just talk you through it, because I've got it here. So this is my time tower. And basically I've done a fair few of these, particularly with some refugee groups and that I work with that might be moving from residence to residence, and then they can grow their herbs on their kitchen bench, and it grows and it's self-watering. So pretty much the idea is it's an old piece of PVC piping which is lying around everywhere. The bottom section down here is the reservoir. Now in this particular one, and you make sure you seal the bottom properly. In this particular one, I have got some river pebbles, which I encased in some this EnviroCloth, and then that comes all the way up to here. Now, the gaps between the river pebbles is what holds the water. There's a hose at the top here, which you might be able to see. Trust me, there's a hose, and that's where the water goes in. So that fills this reservoir, and I've got a couple of tiny little holes here so the overflow can come out. And then the water is wicked up. Now, basically, you can try this at home. If you get a bucket of water and you put a tea towel in it, now that's half full of water, I'll put it down, that water is going to rise up through that material and it's going to empty the bucket. Pretty much the same thing happens here. We've got the material, so it doesn't matter if there's only this much water in here, the water still travels up through the material. And the soil also acts like a wick. So the soil will draw that water up, particularly once these plants become established, and their roots will draw the water up. So you don't have to come along and just water on top here, otherwise it's all just going to go down the side. Just fill this reservoir up and the water comes up. So this is just full of different types of variations of thyme plants, a bit of a fan at the time. So, but you can put whatever plants that you like in there, and they can just sit on your windowsill as long as it gets some sun. All right, so that's a basic idea of a thyme self-watering tower. All right, now a smaller one, which you can do with students at school, is just with a bottle. Now I was going to bring a bottle along, but I'm going to go and buy a bottle for no reason. So I've got this one that I prepared earlier. You basically cut it in half. You get a piece of material and you thread the material up the bottom, like so. And this is like a little, basically a self-watering pot or self-watering wicking garden. Exact same principle. A bit of water in the reservoir, a little bit of soil on top. Making a mess again. And there you have it. Now you can put a seed in there. Got some seeds here. Got some pea seeds. Put some seeds in there, and that's going to remain moist the whole time. That water's going to travel up through the material and keep it moist. The main reason why seeds don't grow is because they dry out. So this is the perfect way to keep them moist all the time. You should collect your own seeds. The best thing about these, I think, is the comprehension activities you can do with all the information on the back. But the other thing you can do is cuttings. These are great for cutting. So I just went out to the gardens before. Shouldn't do this on the Botanic Gardens, but it's rosemary. That's not really, shouldn't say that. Rosemary is really easy to make cuttings with, but you can make cuttings for lots of things. So you want to be choosing a piece of the plant that has got new growth on it. If you choose a piece of the plant that's got flowers or seed on it, this plant's trying to put the energy into the flowers and the seeds. They're trying to put energy into reproducing. So it's not the best one, even though it's rosemary, it'd probably work. Not the best one to do cuttings with. You get a piece like this, basically remove a lot of these lower branches. It's a foliage. I usually scrape off the end, but other people say that's not necessary. Just scrape off that outer layer, and then I dip it in a bit of honey. So honey, full of sugar, give it lots of energy. And it's also got some molding agents in it. Good old honey. Now I always also take off the top little brand new foliage as well, because the plant's probably putting energy into that. Dip it in there. 100% guaranteed that will grow into a new rosemary bush. So you can make your remembrance gardens at schools very cheap and easily like that. So that's like a little wicking garden. Here's what I did, and I do feel sorry for this plant. I apologise to it every time I show it, but this is about 4 years old, this poor Davidson's plum. And I propagated some Davidson's plum. I was doing experiments, some with seeds and some with cuttings. I can't even remember what this was because I put it in my side passage and forgot about it. And the rain obviously fills it up from time to time. But it should probably be about 1 metre tall by now, maybe a bit higher. I might bonsai it actually. But anyway, it's a good demonstration. So this, it doesn't have any material left, that's rotted away, but the soil still acts like the wick and takes up, and it's a healthy looking little plant. I hate to see the size of the plums that it grows, but so this is a Davidson's plum, one of our rainforest native plums. So that's your miniature wicking gardens, but we do these on a huge scale. I've probably got time. How am I going? Yeah, I've got time. So imagine this is your typical garden bed. And using the sort of technique I showed earlier by putting these pots upside down, whatever you've got to fill in the gaps of the reservoir. I've got some pots once again. I've always got pots. Basically, I'm going to wrap this. When we started doing it, we used to lay these pots down and then put the material over the top. Now we wrap the whole thing and encircle it around. So it's very wet. Don't want to make too messy. Right, there we go. Put those there. Put that on this side, and then I encase that over the top. Now that's going to stop all the soil going down and filling all those gaps so no water will fit in. Those pots come up to pretty much where I've got some weed poles to come out, and then I'll put my soil on top of that, and then I'll put my plants in straight away. So that's basically the gist of it. We've done some of these. I did some of these at Moree High School, and we used 3 metre sleepers. It's an old container. So basically, we lay down 4 sleepers, each 3 metre long, and look, realistically, 3 metres is too big to grow a veggie garden because you have to get in the garden to do the harvesting and produce, but that's what they had. So 3 metres by 3 metres, and then they had an old pool liner which we put down, and then we filled that with rubble that was just lying around the school. So concrete and things like that. Then we covered that with this EnviroCloth. Then we put 4 more sleepers down, and then we put the soil on top. Now that we didn't even use an outlet pipe, because once the water got to the top of that bottom sleeper, it would just come out at the lowest point. And then we just planted in it. And I got on a plane, came back to Sydney. But I ran into that teacher about 3 years later at Glen Innes High School, and she said that they were so successful, they made a number 5 of them. So they do work, and they work really well, which probably leads me to my next slide, I think, from memory.
There's one more question. Laura's asking, what fast-growing seeds do you recommend?
Fast-growing seeds. This time of year, I'd probably. Well, look, we're getting into the warmer weather. I'd start my spring planting now, so I'd be putting things like lettuce. Winter generally things grow slow, but this is an example of things that didn't grow particularly slow. I'll get back to those seeds, and then beans are quick too. So if you want to plant and you want to harvest before the end of the year, and that's a bit of a toughie in schools, then things like your beans and your peas in winter are particularly fast. Lettuce, things like kale and that can grow fairly quickly as well, and they're always good to use at school. Some of your slower things are more like your cabbages and your broccolis and cauliflowers, but that can also depend on the season, how cold it gets as well. This is a wicking bed that we did. You'll see on the left there is a colleague of mine, Darren. We did this at a school in Southwest Sydney in June. So we went out and we helped them create one wicking bed, and they were going to create more with the community and some of the students. Then just before, when they came back from the holidays is the photo at the bottom, and this was the photo that was sent to me, I think, last week. So it's less than 2 months, or about 2 months, and it's ready to harvest a lot of that stuff in there. Now that's due to a couple of factors. Not only is the wicking garden obviously working, and we use the pots like this method on the bottom. We covered it with the EnviroCloth, filled it with water, but then we used a no-dig garden technique. So we just didn't fill it with soil. We filled it with a variety of different growing mediums, which I'm going to talk about soon. So I tend not to just use soil. I think it's rubbish. In fact, my daughter did an experiment years ago when she was in year 6 at school, I think, and she had to do a science experiment. And I was really hoping, this is getting wet already here. I was really hoping that she would do something really wild, like diurnal foraging patterns of the sooty oyster catcher or something like that, but she wanted to grow potatoes. So she had 4 pots. She grew potatoes, the same amount of potatoes in a pot of potting mix, soil that she bought from the hardware, not poor quality, average, good quality potting mix, sugarcane mulch, just sugarcane mulch she planted in, sand, like a Play Kids sandpit sand, and compost from our compost heap. And I was fairly certain I knew the results. The compost would go better and gradually change, but I was surprised that the sand and the potting mix grew exactly the same height, piffly little plants, and the same amount of potatoes we harvested at the end out of those 2, and that was small basically not worth harvesting. The sugarcane mulch was the slowest, but then by the end of the experiment, it had caught up as it had started to break down and caught up with the other two. In the compost, it's like 5 times the size of the plants and pretty much the same with harvesting. So you've really got to be careful what you buy. And if you're going to buy soil from the hardware store, you need to supplement it, and not with the synthetic fertilizers. Don't get me started. But just with good compost. In compost, you can make yourself all the worm farm castings and things like that. So, I mean, this was less than 2 months, and this is winter, and things don't grow as well in winter. So it was a real good success story with the Wicking Gardens and with that produce. Didn't really answer the question about seeds. Some of the tomatoes you can plant, you'd be able to plant soon, and you'd have harvested some of the early fruiting varieties. I think in schools I tend to plant the small ones, the cherries, the grapes, and things like that. As I said, beans are really quick. Some of the larger things like your corn and that, you might struggle to get a crop before the holidays, and that's why schools tend to avoid those sort of crops. But I would stick to things that you're going to eat, you know, and you want the kids to eat.
Can I ask another question?
Yep.
How do you stop caterpillars eating broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage whilst they are growing?
Yeah, good question. So there's a few different ways. There's some I guess homemade remedies that you can sprays that you can make yourself. There's the garlic spray or a soap spray so particularly with the aphids, the caterpillars, we tend to find what works best is put those little mimic ones around in the garden, because they tend to be apparently territorial. If they see other ones flying around, then they won't come and land nearby. And it seems to work. We've suggested that to schools, so they've made them out of old milk bottles or yogurt containers and just put them floating in the garden, and the others tend to stay away, believe it or not. I find that the gardens, when I work with the kids with special needs, they love going around and picking them off, and that works really well as well. And you can put them in the classroom and watch the life cycle go on there. But I think another thing is have a healthy garden. If you've got, I know a lot of principals, sorry if there's any principals out there, like to have these neat gardens with these rows of, well, let's have 6 rows by 4 rows of, you know, cabbages, because it looks neat, and we can do maths, you know, 6 times 4. But realistically, it's just a beacon. It's just like flashing light to a cabbage. Look at that, you know, cabbages. I like to plant things like that last picture I showed. We just mass plant a whole lot of stuff, and because we put so much organic matter in the soil, it's going to grow. It doesn't matter if it's overcrowded. It doesn't matter about competition, because there's so much food for those plants to eat. So if you have like a flowers and some sort of herbs growing near them as well, sometimes it puts off the scent as well. But a healthy garden usually keeps the caterpillars away. Ladybirds obviously like to eat the aphids. Tomato leaf spray works well with the aphids too. But yeah, there's lots of different, it's a good science activity actually to, you know, try a few things and see what works. But picking them off is pretty good too. All right, into the no-dig. I'm sold on the no-dig actually. Do you know about hugelkultur? No. I was just sorry, I got distracted. So no-dig gardens is, rather than just putting soil in, you're putting layers, just like your compost bin, right? Now what I want to really stress with teachers is there are some amazing gardeners out there and they have these strict formulas for their no-dig gardens. You've got to put the grass clippings above the straw and then put your molasses on to get it. And honestly, if you just put a good diversity of stuff in there, it's going to be better than just getting soil from the shops, right? So basically a no-dig garden is, you make all these layers and it's really lush and it mixes all in together and it breaks down over different periods of time. So it provides a lot of goodness to the garden for a long time. Now in Germany, they use a thing called hugelkultur, where they pile up old sort of vegetation, logs and sticks and things like that, and in various stages of decay. And this is what I've done at my place. So I've piled up some things that are rotting quite a bit, some things that rot quickly, like a banana trunk or something like that, next to some things that are washed up on the beach. I'm not supposed to take them, I know, but that are going to take years and years to break down. And you pile them all up and you fill the gaps with bits of soil and compost and all that, and you pile it up and gradually breaks down over the years and it continually feeds the garden. So I'm talking about huge piles of these things and plant into the side of them and continue harvesting gradually lowers down. The no-dig garden's similar to that. So it's no-dig because you're not digging around. If weeds come, and weeds will come, the soil's so loose, you just pull them out really easily. So in that particular, and I've just given an example there of you go greens and browns, just like your compost. And some people say, oh, you've got to have 17 times as much brown as green. You don't worry too much about that, because if you worry too much about that, you won't do it. But if I make a garden now in school and I have the opportunity, I do this sort of technique. So it's a mixture of carbons, which are your browns, with nitrogen, your green. The pictures there, one's from the teacher training day, and we had the Clontarf Academy kids from Dover Senior High out that day. And you can see Patty Lane, who's one of my colleagues there. She's got the loosen layer, and now she's putting a straw layer over the top of that. So your loosen is it's the green, it's full of nitrogen, and then the straw is your carbon over the top. Down the bottom, there's an example of a garden, I think, from down in the Illawarra, and they do amazing school garden programs down there, and that you can see the produce there, and basically they do the no-dig technique. So on that picture there, I think I start off with some newspaper and then do fruit scraps. You don't have to do fruit scraps. If you're worried about rats and that coming in, don't do fruit scraps. Put some manure down there or something. Then there's dry leaves, manure, sugarcane mulch, grass clippings, pea straw mulch, compost and straw. Now, that is just an example. Should I do another example? Yeah, I'll do an example. I can stay small, can't I? Or should I? Yeah. So we're going to pretend this is our garden. All right. Down the bottom, we're going to put some cardboard. You don't have to put cardboard, but I always put cardboard down, particularly if I'm putting the garden over the top of really compacted soil or potentially weeds are going to come up. So this will solarise those weeds. It'll stop the weeds coming through. So I've put some cardboard down the bottom. Lots of times now we're doing lots of habitat gardens or green corridors along the edges of schools. Rather than dig up all that grass, you just cover it with cardboard and then cover it with wood. Bang it straight into it. So that's your carbon. All right, now, if it's really compacted soil, I would dig with a fork. That's no dig, or I would prod. So sort of put mandarin and compost and stuff. Potatoes, peels, some coffee, tea bags and whatnot down the bottom there. Spring onion. All right. That's our nitrogen, all that good rotting compost. Might put a bit of shredded paper, I might prepared earlier. Now it's important, it's too much for this container, it's important that it's loose. If you put that down and it's really compacted, then that might become like paper mache in there and form a film in there, and you don't want that to happen. And it's also important to put water, I pretend, between each layer. All right, there's lots of water there. Seedlings in there, it's probably going to be detrimental, probably burn. Manure. Now I've got some sugarcane mulch, put a layer of that, a nice generous layer of that. On top of that, I've got a bit of compost out of the compost bins from our Yellowwood garden here. Okay. I'm not used to being inside, sorry. And then finally, and this is just the order I chose today. It doesn't matter. But on top, I put a nice thick layer of straw. Now, I get this from my local produce store guy. He rings me up and he says, I've got some wet stuff that no one wants to buy because they buy it for their horses and that. It's starting to get a bit mouldy and some beauty. And he sells it to me really cheap. Now, I plant straight into that straw. That straw is probably about that thick. I make a little pocket called pocket planting. I put a little bit of soil in there, a bit of compost, put the plant in there, put it around, and it's nice and cozy in there. And there's your no-dig garden, and it's going far away. And you don't have to keep putting nutrients or fertilizers into it, because that's going to break down slowly and start to heat up and really do the job. So that's pretty much a no-dig.
Just one question.
Question?
I've heard that coffee grounds are bad for plants because the caffeine is supposed to kill off competition from other plants. Is this true?
Yeah, look, I've heard all sorts of rumours like that as well. I use it all the time. I wouldn't go and put a whole bucket load around my plants, even though it's supposed to keep snails and that away as well. But in moderation, it's not going to do any damage as well. And the same people, say, don't put citrus in your compost bin. There's no reason to. The worms might not like that. Well, the worms will go and eat something else. They're not necessarily going to eat that. But I think with the things like citrus and coffee grounds, if you have mainly that going in, then it's going to affect your soil. It's going to affect the pH of the soil. Certainly the citrus is going to make it more acidic. Some plants like that, but most probably don't. So, but in moderation, certainly. I mean, I always put coffee in the compost bin. It has no impact on my plants. All right. So what have we got there? Can we go back one? Just can't remember what it was. Oh, so yeah, just like a couple of examples of no-dig garden. So the one on the left there, they're starting to put the layers down. You can see it's really full of organic matter. The one on the right there, it's probably the last layer there and it's ready to plant in. So a couple of the school gardens, both of these school gardens are from down the Illawarra way. And yes, it's some amazing permaculture type gardens in those schools there. And the kids do an amazing job and their understanding of the whole process is phenomenal. All right. So the next one, I'm going to chat about, how are we going for time? Cruising. Is herb spirals. So I'm sort of going through phases. I did a herb spiral at a teacher professional development day about 6 or 7 years ago. And then I did about 20 in the next couple of months, and I was so sick of herb spirals. But look, I think they're an amazing learning opportunity. So many areas of the curriculum you can get into creating a herb spiral, but most schools have got some old pavers or bricks lying around, and it's a great little way you can grow a huge amount of herbs in a very small, compact space. So the idea of the herb spiral probably started over in more the northern European countries and the UK and that, where they like to grow the Mediterranean style herbs, but it gets a bit cold. So they would create these gardens using dark rocks and that which hold a lot of the heat. And they would also have it in such a way, because in the northern hemisphere, the water flows in a clockwise direction. So they would do the spiral clockwise. The southern hemisphere, I do them in anti-clockwise. The reality is, it's just a whole lot of bricks and it's not concrete together, so the water just goes through it anyway. But, it's a good talking point, I think. So at the top of the spiral, you put your herbs that like the more drier, hotter climates, like things like rosemary. And that's a typical one to put in the top. And on the northern side, those herbs that can handle a bit of heat, and it tends to be the ones with the smaller leaves, like our thyme. Things like thyme, oregano around on the northern side that can take a bit of heat, full sun. And then the plants that like a bit more moisture and like it cooler are shaded out on the southern side. So it's a good talking point. Sometimes I get the kids to read the label, say, half sun, half shade, whatnot. We should go here. It's a real discussion on where to put the plants. So you can see that one there, that particular one there was created with the staff at Headspace down in Wollongong, and they use it now with young people who come to the garden and they go out and spend time in that garden. It was a disused area in the back of the building. There's probably 20 plants in there. And at the moment, it's really lush and inspiring, and all those plants go really well. So with the soil, I tend to do the same as a no-dig. So I layer it up as I go, as I build the spiral. Now that soil's going to drop. It's going to drop fairly quickly. But the good thing about herbs and that is you can just top it up and top up over some of the leaves. Those leaves will probably die off and maybe even turn into roots, but the herbs will continue to grow because they're pretty hardy. And mix it with flowers and all sorts of things. And it can really look like an attractive, particularly when it all cascades down the sides. So I do have a video. It's probably not necessary to hear the sound, but it just shows. I just did one up earlier this year at a high school in Western Sydney. I can talk to it. Yeah, there you go. So this is at Macquarie Fields High School. They've got an old ag plot that was disused, and they're turning into their environmental learning space. So in there, we've done helped them with a bush tucker garden and this herb spiral. So basically, I start off by getting my bottom layer down like that. I put some cardboard down there. I didn't have quite enough. to cover any weeds that might have been there. And then I put my first layer down, and then I go up a little bit higher, and it was raining this day and I was getting very wet, but that's all right. I keep going up, and then when I'm happy with the shape, I'll start filling in with soil. So what I used there was I had a bucket where I had some straw, and I had that soaking in water and a seaweed solution, and I used some of the compost from the school. So I mixed those together, and so I did a layer of the straw, which had been soaking, and then I put some compost on top, then water. And a half in diameter, so then you can reach into the centre of the garden. But the reality is you can fit about 4 metres of garden in that metre and a half, which is one of the beauties of the herb spiral. So they didn't have bricks; they had pavers, which is perfectly fine. And we keep going up higher. And basically talking about there how it is raining, and these herbs are going to think, oh, this is nice. But it's going to get really hot there in Macquarie Fields in the middle of summer. So it's important that when your decision making comes to help me with this, but it wasn't to be. This was back in the early stages, and back now I'm out with schools and working with the students again, but back then it wasn't happening. And then just go around and plant them in. And now I've spoken to the principal since, and he said it's absolutely firing. Those herbs have just taken off and it's exploded. But it's a good little talking point. It's a good little opportunity for the kids. And you can talk about how many more bricks do you think we might need, and estimate, how big's the circumference, radius, all sorts of things. Okay. So here's a few examples. The top left-hand one, that's just one that I had at my old house, and I think it was way back when my daughter was about 7, and she was getting under my feet. So I said, can you just go and make me herb spiral those bricks? And she said, what's that? And I showed her a picture, and then 10 minutes later she was back and had done it. But it went clockwise too. But it was just neglected. It was just left, and the herbs absolutely thrived there. I don't think I watered it even. It was under an old mandarin tree, and it was doing really well. The other ones here, I guess I was just going to talk about how we're going for time. Better be quick. The ones on the right there, I was working with some support unit kids, and I don't know, sometimes it's probably best not to show some kids how to use a level, because when we're making this herb spiral, they wanted to make sure every single brick was level. And yeah, that took me a long time. But this particular one, and that's it down the bottom, where I actually cemented that one in because they wanted to use it as a bit of a racetrack as well, because there was a kid who loved turbo and the snail and the spiral. So it was a big effort, but it ended up looking really nice. So herb spirals, great little water saving garden that you can put in. All right, what have we got next? So just on some other gardens, design techniques and using the flow of the water in the garden as well. So this is a school out in Western Sydney. They had a problem with drainage. The water would flow down, and that bottom area would become just mud and slosh. And basically we covered the entire thing with mulch, cardboard and mulch. It was a big effort, and thankfully I wasn't involved in that part of it. But then we planted it out, and this is in Blacktown Council, and some of the councils are amazing with the plants that you can get. So every household person can get 2 free plants. Blacktown Council, you can sign those over to the school. I think that day there might have been 150 plants planted in the ground on that day. And so this has become an amazing learning space. This was 2 years ago, June 2018, there you go, I wrote it. And I've been out there, I go out there about once a term. I haven't been out there this year. Talk to the kids, and we do activities in that garden space. This is what it looks like now. This is less than 2 years. So there's a big frog pond down the bottom that goes up the slope. Right up the top, there's a huge big yarning circle with some old trees that were chopped down. There's a big Aboriginal flag on the container up the top there. There's all these paths and there's little breakaway sections, and it's an amazing space, and the kids look after it, and then they absolutely love their lessons in there. And I'm looking forward to getting back out there and seeing how it's progressed.
Good question.
Yep.
Possums can be a real pest. Is there anything other than covering with netting that you can do?
I've got possums at my place, big time, and I covered it with netting. To be honest, I don't know what else you can do with possums. I love having possums around, but I have bandicoots as well, and all sorts of things getting into my gardens, and that sort of things you've just got to stop them getting in. I can't think of anything. There's a school I work with down the Illawarra. They had a problem with deer. I mean, deer can cause a really big problem. Rabbits are another one, the cockatoos, the ibis, a whole lot of things. I know a school in Belmore where they've created a wetland for the ibis, so they've embraced them. But yeah, I'm sorry, you've just got to net them. And I hate the netting. I think it looks horrible, but yeah, so that's what I do. If you can come up with something else, someone tells you something else, let me know. So these sort of habitat gardens or outdoor learning spaces becoming incredibly popular, and that has cost next to nothing. I get donated a lot of plants to my program from various nurseries. The council donated a lot of plants to there as well. So yeah, they're a great space for kids to get outside and learning. This is a bit of a bugbear of mine. Every school, I think, pretty much has got it. They've got these poor trees just standing all alone through the playground, usually along fence lines. And I'm making it my crusade this year when I can get out into schools more to connect them up, and with shrubs and grasses and ground covers there. Because the problem we had this year in particular, at the beginning of this year, is we had this incredibly long drought, and the trees become weak, and they attract all sorts of pests because they can't fight them off. So the pests come in, and then all of a sudden we had that tremendous amount of rain, and all of a sudden the foliage multiplied by about 5 on some of these eucalyptus trees, and they're just dropping down because they couldn't withstand the heat. And I had so many schools ringing me up saying, oh, these trees are dropping their limbs, and it's because they were so weak, and then they got all this extra foliage. If there was better soil around these plants to begin with, then they wouldn't be so weak in the first place, because it would hold a lot of that moisture. So if we connected those trees up with gardens, planted them out with all sorts of native grasses and shrubs, then those areas aren't used by the kids. So it's something I want to do. We have a question.
What would you recommend planting in schools to provide shade, bearing in mind that principals are wary of trees dropping limbs?
Yes, and that's a great question. We got some funding from Eucalyptus Australia a couple of years ago to go and talk about eucalyptus, the importance of eucalyptus, and plant some in. And I was a bit shocked that no one wanted eucalyptus. I can understand why. And so I've been talking to, there's a researcher from Western Sydney University at the moment, and he's done a lot of research around this, because the problem is the playgrounds are getting so hot, particularly this artificial rubber and asphalt. It's like 50 degrees in a playground, at least in summer. So you need trees for the thermal comfort of the building as well. This particular researcher, he's European. I've got a native plant background. He's got his, but he's researched the ideal trees. I haven't seen his final list, because I can see where he's coming from, but he's working now with Greening Australia, and they're doing a program to plant these out in schools. So I can't recall, I haven't seen the list of the plants he's got, but they're going to be planting some of these large trees, but then a native understory underneath. If I maybe get your details or something, I can find that out, because I know I'm going to be involved in that program when it gets up and running. But Greening Australia plan on doing this, planting a lot of trees out through schools, particularly in Western and South West Sydney. And the trees are not going to be native trees, which, yeah, I'm not sure, but I can understand. Sorry, I didn't answer that question. I'm not familiar with your non-native trees. I mean, I can say what they are, but I don't know what are best. I know a lot cause problems with their roots and things like that, but some of them, are very hardy and can withstand the Australian climate quite well. So, particularly some of the deciduous ones, which open up and allow the heat to come in winter, and then form a nice canopy in summer. So, yeah, I'm keen to see what that list is. Yeah. All right. What else have I got? or just habitat gardens. So we got some funding to do some regional habitat gardens a few years back as well. And that was an amazing program. So I'm hoping to do more of that. So these particular gardens were done around threat species. So we were out at a regional school. The first one's Glen Innes, the second one's Coonabarabran, the third one's a little place called Gilgai, and then last one's at Warrawong. And basically the students or the school select an animal that they would like to recreate habitat for. They researched it, did a lot of researching around it, and then we came back and we helped them create that habitat. So there's little nest boxes made there. So the first one was for the Burralong frog, the second one's for a little marsupial mouse, the masked owl, and the southern brown bandicoot. And it was just a great learning experience creating these gardens and putting in the signs at each of them. So we did about 15 of those throughout regional New South Wales. And as I said, I'm hoping to do some of that in Metro Sydney, probably next year. And I think that's probably pretty close to it. So there's my details if you want to get in contact with me. But if you've got any questions about any of those things, I can talk more about bug hotels and things like that if we've got time, but we probably...
I just put in a question, what gardens the attendees would consider to build with their classes, and if they have any questions about those.
So do I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I believe you're going to answer a question to show you're here if you want to get accreditation. So I will ask, if we build a herb spiral in the Southern Hemisphere at your school, which direction should that herb spiral be built in? Is that too hard? Were you listening? It's the same way the water goes down your sink. Or maybe you don't know that, I'm not sure. But the water flows opposite in the Southern Hemisphere that does in the Northern Hemisphere.
So there's interest in veggie gardens and herb spirals.
Right.
Spirals twice. Yeah. Any particular hints for those that you want to give them on the way?
The most important thing about veggie gardens is you get it in the sun. So try not to find a place, you know, right next to a building where it's not going to get any sun, because you're probably not going to have much success. And it needs water, but it needs to be able to hold that water. So really good organic matter in the soil when you're planting into it. Really important, yes. And plant stuff that you're going to use and get the kids using.
Yeah, that's great.
It's good to get them eating healthy. And it's amazing, you know, they won't eat this and that at home, but they'll eat it in school, particularly if they've grown it. So.
Crystal loves the herb spiral idea, and with the limited space around the classroom, she's looking at the plastic bottle wicking bag.
Yeah. There's all sorts of things you can do with plastic bottles as well. I've seen them done with the larger milk bottles and put on fences and painted and all that sort of stuff as well. As I can say, the herb spiral doesn't have to be a herb spiral either. It can be a flower spiral. I know that we did a sensory garden at a school. Can't remember where, and it was a flower spiral. It looked really nice too. So. Just with the herb spiral too, I made a mistake at one school. We planted lemongrass in the middle, and we thought, how beautiful feature in the middle, and it thrived. It was sensational. Problem was, it got so big that it shaded out all the other herbs, and they all struggled. So it was a lemongrass spiral.
What plans for areas shady in winter but hot afternoon and sun in summer?
Yeah, the afternoon sun can be a bit of a killer, but if you keep the water, I mean, plants need sun, plants like sun, but if you keep the water up to them, that's not too bad. Shady in winter. Look, things like celery go all right, carrots will go all right. But plants like sun, and it's difficult. I think things like your broccoli and cauliflower are probably going to struggle. So particularly your large leaf plants, because they've got large leaves for a reason. They want to take in as much sun as they can. So the smaller leaf things like your carrots and things like that tend to still go all right, a bit of shade.
Dion says that it's anti-clockwise.
Yes.
And she loves the snacking garden, such tiny tomatoes, snow peas, parsley,
yeah,
etc.
Yes, yeah. I love to grow. So I do a lot of work I'm in Reeby Juby Centre once a fortnight, unless I'm out in country areas. And sometimes we'll just go and sit in the veggie garden and have a talk. And we'll grab a lettuce leaf and we'll grab some, cherry tomatoes, and we'll grab some of this and we'll wrap it all up, a few herbs, and just eat it. And the kids are going, wow, this is amazing, because, they don't tend to eat things like this. And we just sit and graze and talk. And we might eat 15 different things, pull out a bit of fennel and have a chew on that. So it's a lot of fun just to do that. It's not all about, pulling out weeds or or digging in the soil all the time. Not as much as I love digging in the soil, but yeah, grazing is good. All right. Thanks for coming. It's really been a job. It's been different for me. Usually I'm hands-on. I'm not usually sitting and usually in the garden, but it's been different talking to this camera, that's for sure. So get in contact if you've got any further questions as well. Thank you, and bye from the Botanic Gardens.